Welcome to another edition of Trueworth Tech Talks. I'm John, partner and CIO of Trueworth Consulting. Today, we're going to talk about digital luxury brand experiences. And I'm pleased to say that joining me to talk about that, we've got a couple of absolute experts in their field, Dean and Caroline.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me here today. Really love the studio on Deansgate, Manchester. I'm an experienced consultant. I've been working in luxury, automotive, retail, and e-commerce for the past 20 years, mostly on the agency side. And for the past 10 years, I've been involved in quite a few digital transformations in this space. I led a transformation with Aston Martin where we transformed the customer experience and delivered one of their most successful digital launches ever for DB12. I also worked with Ineos Automotive back in 2020. I helped Sir Jim Ratcliffe's brand launch their new Ineos Grenadier, a 4x4 vehicle. So we launched that in 36 countries, grew their audience by over 40% and smashed their sales targets within the first 2 months of launch. I'm now working with brands and scale-ups on a kind of growth trajectory to help them set a 3 to 5 year vision for their customer experience, and then work backwards from that to develop an integrated plan of how to make that happen. In the summer, I went self-employed. I set up Brevet Consulting, and I'm now working with Media City's Immersive Technologies Innovation Hub on realizing immersive experiences in mass participation scenarios at some of the bigger venues in the city.
Great. Thanks, Dean. Glad to have you here. Caroline?
Hi, John. I am Andy. So yeah, great to be here up north. I am a CMO on brand side mainly, and I've spent the last 20 plus years working with some great brands, mainly in the luxury beauty space, but also occasional forays into fashion and jewellery. I've worked with some great brands from startup to full scale up, i.e. Augustina Spade. I was with their pre-launch and their unicorn size now. I've worked with Clinique, GHD, Noble Panacea, some really nice kind of brands like Medicate, British brands. I am also freelance as a consultant, a marketing consultant, and I do a bit of everything actually because I also work with a behavioural psychologist, looking at customer experience and what powers customer interaction with your brand and what creates loyalty and longevity of brand followers. And how you can improve an overall customer experience both online and offline. Um, and I have my own skincare brand that's just launched as well called Next Skincare. So that's more to come on that one. But my main play here is around my passion in the luxury space, around that customer experience, customer loyalty, and how to create that both on and offline.
Great. Thanks both. So on today's podcast, we're going to talk about four main themes. We're going to talk about Gen Z and how that is such an important demographic, especially within the context of luxury brands and digital experiences going forward. We're going to talk a bit about hyper-personalization, how technology is enabling brands who do it well to hyper-personalize customer experiences. We're then going to talk about blending physical and digital, for the brands that have got still a physical footprint as well as a burgeoning online presence. And then in the final part, we're going to bring it all together, hopefully give people some practical advice and some key takeaways, and talk a little bit about where we see the future.
Great. Let's
Sounds
go.
good. So, first part today is about how customers are connecting differently, the changing behaviors, particularly as I mentioned with Gen Z and things like that, and how brands can leverage techniques and technology and certain approaches available to them in order to help to engage the customers a lot better. So we mentioned Gen Z. Probably best that we start off by defining what we mean by Gen Z. Dean, how would you define Gen Z?
Yeah, I mean, it feels right to start with this segment of customer. Generation Z, Gen Z, they are digital natives. They are a segment that is embracing and experimenting with technologies, and starting to drive some new behaviors. Potentially getting a bit of a bad rap in some parts of the press about attitudes to the workplace, and their long-term financial goals. But make no mistake, they are going to be one of the most influential purchasing segments over the next 10 years. They're going to be driving growth. They're going to be and they're going to be driving growth and lots of new different experiences.
So when you say you mentioned changing behaviors there, what types of things are you talking about? How with Gen Z, how are those behaviors going to change, do we think?
So they've become they're a much more conscious generation. They're looking for brands that that assign with more of their life values. They want brands. They want to assign themselves with brands that are maybe a bit more conscious about how products are made, how products are sourced, and how they're bringing products to market. So I think there's definitely there's different expectations of brands from a Gen Z generation.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think there's a recent LSN report that called this generation. They're voting with their money basically. They're purpose driven generation. So particularly pertinent when we're talking about luxury brands, which obviously have a higher price tag. This consumer is not buying the bag that everybody else has got just because everybody else has got, or even the bag that that they wanted to have because their mum had it, or a celebrity had it. They're voting with their money to align themselves to a brand values. They are really looking for a brand to speak to their own values around sustainability, around transparency, materials. They are looking for that from a brand because that's how they begin to they have grown up to believe that that's what they're looking for. And I think a success for a luxury brand isn't, well, we've always done it like this and people have bought it, because we've seen time and time again that there are brands, and we could probably between us think of many, many examples of brands, and we can get onto that, that have maybe left the speaking about their values behind, and maybe are then leaving a Gen Z customer behind.
They're
Whereas
almost
they're
taking it for granted, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And they're not creating future aspiration. And to create future aspiration as a luxury brand, it has to be thinking about aligning values, and speaking about those values, and creating not just a product that somebody wants to own, but something that they're proud to align themselves with as a brand that's equal to their values.
So you mentioned that between us, we could probably come up with a few examples. Let's have some. Give us a couple of examples.
So I guess on the maybe on the more sustainable front, one good example out there is Stella McCartney. So I think as a brand, they've really tried hard to become a more conscious brand from a sustainability point of view, and invested in that, and starting to put that front and center. So now they're externalizing the kind of uh, uh, footprint of their products, and where their materials are sourced, and kind of exposing that in a nice way through QR codes on the labels on every garment.
Yeah, and I think to connect to a luxury consumer, they're not just getting the Stella McCartney bag or outfit or whatever. They're getting that journey, so they can connect themselves into that. And I think that makes the item way more valuable.
Mhm.
Personally, to understand where it's come from and how the process has been. I think also what Stella McCartney do, yes, they are known, I suppose, for their sustainability. But I think they don't over the top kind of greenwash, or kind of, and they still have their luxury ethos as part of their foundation, and the sustainability is almost a given, but they are innovating within it. So they're keeping people interested in that space. And I think um another fashion example, actually, Vivienne Westwood. they're on track to be 100% renewable energy for all of their ready-to-wear collections by the end of this year, which is not something that's front and center of their brand because they haven't gone out there to kind of shout about that side of things, because they are still Vivienne Westwood, which she stands for, but they've evolved that brand that's been around a long, long time to be more sustainable, to connect with that younger Gen Z audience, which I think is something every brand should be looking at doing.
I think what's also interesting, even though we have this backdrop of uh, the customers being more conscious about the brands that they engage with, um, in the backdrop of that conscious purchasing behavior is is almost a huge flip, because the same audience have the biggest growing power out there, and this generation's appetite for growth in purchasing is growing something like 3 times more than any previous generation. So even though they're conscious in terms of the brands that they interact with, um, they're still, they're still spending the money. They're still going out there. They're just trying to align with the brands that they feel are relevant to them and their life goals. And I think we probably, some of that behavior is fueled by social media and social commerce. And as we start to see that with brands starting to align with different types of influencers, different types of collaborations, and using social media to kind of fuel that buying and that spending power. So we see people like Gucci experimenting with more kind of authentic content creators on TikTok. There was the famous kind of collaboration with the TikTok train enthusiast Francis Bourgeois, where he had a big following on TikTok, really nice, authentic, natural content. And they collaborated for one of Gucci's fashion shows in Milan, which generated millions and millions of engagement in social posts, and attracted a much younger audience around that fashion show.
Gucci have always been good at tapping into that
Mhm.
right audience and the right space. It's funny you mentioned social media there, and with this is a social media generation, Gen Z, of course. I mean, that's a very obvious statement, but within that social media is such an interruption of how people think, how people interact, how people approach their daily lives, right? And
It's a huge shift, right? It's
right, but it's
seismic,
also
yeah.
a huge interruption about how, in terms of how people discover brands
Mm.
or shop from
Or
brands,
have a relationship with the
or have a
brand. Yeah, yeah.
relationship. And there's a patience factor with a new generation where you know you don't get any sort of free passes, particularly because the minute that you've messed up on one channel or one interaction, they're gone because there's a million other choices. And I think it's not the same as, oh, well, the customer services
Mhm.
associate in this store when I went shopping on Saturday wasn't that great, but I'll still go back next week. You're online, so you go somewhere else and you probably don't go back from one bad interaction. So it's created
And
that
it's much easier to do
patience,
so, right? Which is
much easier
fueling
to
that,
do,
yeah.
much easier to do. And and because of the channel diversity, of course, there's so many opportunities to interact with a brand that
Mhm.
if you're not lining all of that up and creating the best possible customer experience across all, then this generation is forming a opinion of a brand in an instant. So the minute you're not, as you say you are, we talked about greenwashing earlier, if you're not 100% sustainable in the way that you say you are, or transparent in how you source your or how you produce your clothing, etc., then they're going to find out, and they're going to form that relationship, and they're going to tell everybody else about it as well. So
Their opinions are formed so quickly.
mm,
And because they're interacting with brands on so many channels, it's potentially quite easy to sometimes misstep and get that wrong, and your potential customers has so much choice across so many different channels that they're going to very quickly move on to the next.
And that's that's a good example where just introducing either a different approach or different technology to help support. So we all know there's really bad examples out there of companies introducing chatbots and things like that that give a really appalling customer experience. But does that underscore the importance of taking things holistically? So thinking about that end-to-end experience in terms of how you engage with the customer?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, 100%. I think, some of the customer behavioral psychology stuff that I do with my business partner in that space is really just looking at what do you, because so many brands don't think from their customer, right? They just don't. They're thinking, what? How do I insert technology like a chatbot, as you referenced, to help me with customer service here and over here? How do I message my latest ad campaign? And the join up just doesn't necessarily work. And a customer may have a bad interaction in customer service, but a positive experience of a new advert or whatever, and the join up is an issue. So they'll be off, if you're not all singing from the same song sheet, as it were.
Yeah, I agree. And despite the fact we're on a podcast that's titled Tech Talks, I fully agree because actually what you have at the moment is you've got this wide toolkit, this wide array of different technologies that can support different customer experiences, different ways of engaging with consumers. But actually, technology should be the tool at the end of it, if you like. Should start with people, go to process, then go to technology.
I mean, personally, I always find it helpful when working with customers is try and understand the behavior, the data you have on your customers, the behaviors that they're showing. Use that alongside future trends and future observations about where we think the industry is heading, and then use all of that data insight to then get into an end-to-end journey mapping process.
Mm.
So that's kind of more customer focused. It's informed by data, informed by behaviors and where we think the industry is heading. And that allows you and your teams to kind of really have a customer focus on what the experience should be across channels and touch points. But then that is also the basis of trying to understand how to then connect that to the right data, the right technology, and the right platforms, not necessarily the other way
But coming
around.
at it from the customer point of
Mhm.
view, for
Yeah.
sure. The amount of light bulb moments I've seen when you kind of go, well, actually, the data shows that your customer isn't going from that page to that page. Actually, first they're checking out your returns policy. Oh, no one goes to that page. Yeah, no, no, they do. Because they're buying an expensive item from you, so they want to know if it's not exactly right. They want to. Oh, okay, it's the amount of those light bulb moments of understanding actually how a customer navigates your website, actually how a customer flicks from offline to online to back to your app, back to wherever,
Mhm.
and brands just not necessarily going, where, how does the customer do it versus how do I want them to navigate?
So we've mentioned, people, process, and then technology, looking at it from a customer-centric point of view. One of the other things you talked about, though, Caroline, was data, right? And actually, one of the challenges that brands have got, any brand, be it luxury or otherwise, is the availability of data, that ability to see one version of the truth. I think another big risk is that because technology has come on so far, and because, with the advent of AI and all these AI powered tools and plugins and experiences that you can generate primarily online, but also some in store as well, right? It's really easy to get it wrong, isn't it? It's really easy to go, especially if you don't take that process customer first, customer centric view, it's really easy to get it wrong. So, what are the types of challenges that we think brands will have trying to implement this?
So I agree that brands have got so many options, tech, data, platforms, different experiences, different channels, lots of complexity. And it is easy to kind of get it wrong and implement something maybe not in the right way. Especially for luxury. Luxury always got that kind of physical store, that close relationship with customers, right? And sometimes that can be lost in translation in the complexity of digital. So it is really important to kind of to really navigate that complexity and get it right.
And think, what does the customer actually want from this
Hmm.
tech? Is this relevant right now for my brand experience? Countless times I've been in digital, in brands where the digital teams have kind of gone, okay, well, we'll release this as phase one. We've all been there, right? Phase one. phase two, phase three,
MVP.
whichever MVP. Exactly. Yeah. But the customer doesn't know that.
Yeah.
And the customer, you've only got one chance with that customer, and you release something and they don't like it, or they have a poor experience with it, then they're not going to keep coming back because you've emailed them to say, phase two is live.
Yeah.
They don't
And
get that
and
boost.
especially what you talked about before in terms of the mobility, I guess, of Gen Z and the amount of options that they've got. Like you say, it only takes one slightly bad experience. And I guess the other thing is that organizationally, you have to be ready to implement a solution, right? Because there's
Yeah.
a piece, as we keep saying, there's a bigger piece than just, oh, right, we've got this cool little bit of tech that engages with
Yeah.
this or does this for a customer off the back of our
ready
website.
ready and agile and keen from every level. But I can think of a great example where, from the outside, Burberry are example where they are a company where, I have in every probably presentation I've done internally at brands I've worked for, externally at events, talked about Burberry and their brilliant tech attitude, i.e., they're the first movers on lots of channels that maybe haven't even made it in social, like Vine. If we remember that, they were the first. They were first on there. They have always been the first to release a reel. They've been on Insta's, first brand partner platforms, blah blah blah, all of that. Right? They are super agile. They've got a super young team pushing stuff out there all the time. But we all know the story of Burberry recently where, they are reporting, I think it's minus 40%, is it,
Mm,
and their losses. And unfortunately, I think they didn't balance their ability to jump on the technical bandwagon with what does my customer want from this jumping on this bandwagon, and potentially looked at platforms that where they were engaging a younger customer, but at the same time, the business was pushing out a more expensive ready-to-wear range where they were focusing on stock in a huge complex ready-to-wear um, scenario that that consumer wasn't buying.
Mm.
So they've now released recently, I think it was last week, the new CEOs released the sort of what they're calling the rescue plan. But really interestingly, the rescue plan is actually all about, I don't know if either of you have read it, but it's all, they say luxury, luxury, luxury the whole way through. But actually, the rescue plan at its heart is about refocusing on what they as a brand are known for. So their
mhm.
outerwear and their scarves. So they're more affordable items where people can buy in at the first level to their brand, not their ready to wear, which is more expensive. And that's quite interesting because I feel like that's a bit of a, like that is absolutely what we all know that they should be doing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But is that luxury behavior, and is it a behavior that's going to incite Gen Z to come along with them? So it's one to watch in terms of
Interesting to see how it plays
how
out.
they do that. Yeah, and fair play to them having that technical prowess to be able to jump into all of these spaces um, and have those things within their stores and within their. I mean, when they launched their Bond Street store, I think it was, or Regent Street store in London, it was everybody had to go and see it as quickly as possible. They had the giant screen, they had RFID tracking on all of the clothing. They recognize the clothing if you're coming in in a Burberry outfit or whatever. Amazing,
Definitely at the forefront. Yeah, I
incredibly at the
remember it.
forefront,
Yeah.
but they didn't evolve it to tap into the Gen Z sustainability, for
Yeah.
instance, as we were talking about before. So could they have used that tech to then play into that by creating that transparency journey, as we discussed with Stella McCartney, and sourcing of the clothing, to really kind of create a connection with that item? Could they play into the world of secondhand ownership? We all know the secondhand value on luxury items, and secondhand marketplaces have had a real not even resurgence, a real surge.
Yes, yeah,
Mhm.
just continued
um,
growth, right?
Yeah.
It's,
yeah, yeah, yeah. As people, partly because of sustainability, I believe, people are prouder to thrift store shop. I think it's got its own That's a huge kind of TikTok way
Yeah.
of thrift store finds, but also from a luxury point of view, to be able to own items that potentially they may not have been able to buy full price or are now classed as kind of vintage. And we're seeing Lux Collective, Vestiaire, they're innovating in a luxury space, but using channels where Gen Z are actually interacting. So I think Lux Collective put something out recently where they'd sold an Hermes bag on TikTok for the first time on TikTok Shop,
Mm.
which is, amazing, but great and shows you where the customer is and what they need from that content and that experience. And back to Burberry, could they have done that? Could they have owned their secondhand space better? And using technology to do so, I believe probably.
And I guess some of the challenges and the headwinds you've alluded to with Burberry, I guess we also see more recently with Nike.
Mhm.
So kind of parting ways with their CEO, John Donahoe, after only 4 years. It seems like after challenging 4 year innings, it's trying to transpire that, again, maybe they kind of lost sight of their core customer. The focus maybe became on kind of, the iconic Air Jordans and taking much more of that brand out and creating more products off the success of that brand. And, maybe focusing a little bit more on cost cutting. And then during that time, just kind of lost a little bit of a sense of the customer, took their foot off of innovation a little bit.
No
Uh,
pun intended.
Very good. And just kind of, lost their way a little bit. And so, you say the resurgence plan, I think Nike's going to have to go through the same process to get itself back to form and
But
connect with those customers.
But whereas, when we were aspiring to own trainers when we were in our teens, it was a choice of, well, actually Reebok, wasn't it? Reebok,
Hmm.
Adidas, or
Hmm.
Nike. But there are some incredible brands coming through
Yeah.
that have created a different philosophy that are stealing market share. Brands like On running shoes,
Oh, yeah.
they're huge now, and nobody, I don't think even the Nike CEO would have sort of anticipated that there would be a brand that kind of came out of nowhere,
And just
and
eat away at their market
eat
share
away
so
at market
quickly.
share, because they weren't on their core kind of customer focus.
Hmm.
And that's they're losing that game. Arguably, they may have lost a bit to them regardless, but I think they've lost a decent chunk due to the fact that they weren't on their A game.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree.
So we talked about some of the, I guess, more established brands that maybe aren't playing into the Gen Z wave particularly well. What about some perhaps newer brands that are? Have you got any examples of those?
So one I've been keeping an eye on more recently over the past few years is Represent. So a British luxury streetwear brand. Yeah, started by brothers in Manchester. So they've been very successful from a kind of direct to consumer brand in establishing quality garments, but using social to kind of build a community around that brand. Really strong presence on social media. I guess powered by some really interesting celebrity collaborations and some really interesting content. So people like Justin Bieber, Motley Crue, The Weeknd, and kind of building a community around that brand and making people feel part of that community, whilst also able to demand a very high price point. So even though they're just under 12 years old, I think they're predicted for over 250 million pounds worth of revenue next year. And that strength, that growth and that strength has come from that strong community and following with that brand that feel that they're part of that brand and part of a club. And now we see Represent moving into retail spaces. And they've actually just recently opened up their flagship store in the city centre of Manchester. So yeah, I just think through that combination of social, feeling of a community and a brand, really seem to have got that right. The represent
I think
guys.
tapping into the tribal thing, that's the
Hmm.
golden nugget, isn't it? Is
Yeah.
creating that alignment in terms of a feeling. It's not just selling more product, it's being part of that tribe. I've got a beauty example, another Manchester one for you. I think it must be because of where we are. Um, there's a brand called Refi, who are pretty new on the scene. But they, from the very off, have stated very clearly as their brand evolves that they are about creating a community. They're not about creating products for the sake of products and launching new products all the time. They create products that are needed or they see are needed as part of a routine within beauty. And they have created a scenario where people to want to buy them because they want to be part of that community. They want to join in on that vibe. And I think they've done a really great job of how they've kind of evolved that with their core consumer base, and involve the customers within the decisions, within the events. They do play the influencer game, but it's not the mega celeb influencer. It's very much an approachable influencer that people can feel part can also be part of that tribe. Another one is Aloe Yoga. It really impressive what they've done in terms of they've kind of taken the Sweaty Betty Lululemon world to the next level. Yes, there were elements of Sweaty Betty or Lululemon that created a community for sure. They very very strong on events and yoga events, etc. But Aloe Yoga are that next level, and in terms of the luxury end of yoga, but also lifestyle, community, connectivity. They're both in person and online community connections. I think they excel at it.
Really good.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, where you start to talk about these brands that are relatively recent startups, or maybe over a decade in the example of Represent, but they're now starting to get more physical footprint, from that initial perhaps more online focused launch. And I think that that's, for me, the primary challenge, especially when you talk about it from a technology perspective, is how the more traditional and more established brands actually pivot the other way. And that brings with itself a whole heap of challenges, right? So how are brands adapting then? How are the more established brands adapting to these behavioral shifts?
I mean, is it? I think that now is the first time to mention the elephant in the room or the jaguar in the room.
The death of an iconic British brand, apparently.
Yeah, no, yeah. It depends which part of which comment on LinkedIn you read, which Daily Mail article you read, whatever. But whatever Jaguar have done, they have managed to get themselves the most talked about brand in the last couple of weeks that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously going to offend the purists, the automotive purists out there. But I think the reality is some of we've touched on it earlier with the Gen Z, the next generation, the majority of the next generation of purchases of their vehicles. I've probably I've not grown up with a combustion engine. So it's a big step, but ultimately I think it just touches on some of those themes from earlier where, shifts in behaviors and expectations are changing. I mean, automotive is having to navigate multiple transformations at the same time, electrification, autonomous driving, and actually, in the next 5 to 10 years, what is the actual role of a vehicle in our day-to-day life if you don't actually need to drive it? And uh, you know, a lot of automotive brands, especially in the luxury space, are gonna have to find new and interesting ways to engage that younger audience. I mean, personally, um, uh, I think it's brave. Jaguar have come out the traps quick. They're potentially the first of many other brands that are going to reassess their brand direction over the next few years. I think from my work at Bentley a few years ago, there's another rebrand coming there. And I think it also looks stunning. There's the obviously the emittance of a Jaguar is huge for people to get their head round, and in the specific campaign that we see, the lack of a vehicle. But if you dig a little deeper, there is events coming up in the next week and a half. We hope to see the new design aesthetic and the direction that Jaguar are heading with their vehicles. So I think it's a little bit too early
I
to.
don't think they need. I think the intelligence of this is actually they don't need the vehicle because this
Mhm.
new generation are it's about aligning values
Yeah.
versus specific product. They're aligning to what Jaguar are saying in the statement they're making versus going, I'm going to buy that car because that car's probably not ready for whatever year's time anyway.
And actually, that's exactly the point of what we've been saying, right? In
Yeah.
terms of, and actually, this could turn out to be an excellent, forerunning example of what we're talking about in terms of a luxury brand adapting to Gen Z, to changing behaviours, to changing ways of engagement. Yeah, so watch this space, I guess.
Exactly, and I think I personally think they're going to be a really interesting brand to watch and to see how they do it. And they're gonna be a case study people follow for whichever reason. And I think they are leading the way. Another example in the fashion world is Loewe. They have publicly stated that their focus is on content creation for channels like TikTok, where their core customer isn't on TikTok at this point in time,
Mhm.
but they're creating an aspirational customer of the future.
Mhm.
They're not talking about short term sales. They're talking about medium to long term establishment of a luxury icon. They're talking about creating a generation of people that are aspiring to own their product in the future, and it's exactly what Chanel taught us all as marketeers a bazillion years ago of releasing the Chanel lipstick to own the lipstick, to aspire to own the handbag. They're doing that over again, but they're doing it wholeheartedly and putting their full kind of focus and strategy into it. And I firmly believe that will create a lasting brand of value to the Gen Z um, purchaser in the future.
Excellent. So some brands starting to do it, plenty of brands yet to still start to even look at it, I guess, let alone start implementing some stuff that we talked about.